My name is Caitriona Ellis, and I'm doing the workshop today on unlocking financial wellness, your path from desperation to prosperity, the property one step at a time. But what I'm also going to do, because obviously I understand that property isn't everybody's cup of tea, and I'm going to frame it around a larger piece around financial wellness. Because that's obviously something that we all need money, as Amy said previously, it is something that we all have used as a tool. Okay? So we'll mix it up because it probably isn't a particular area where there should be something for everybody in it. So Aileen also interestingly said use of stories. So what I'm going to do in my presentation today is a story. And my own path from financial desperation to financial wellness is very much entwined in my own experience, and how I started to do this work was very much based on what I experienced and the steps that I used, the challenges that I found, and how I went from there. So my background is in commerce, and I worked in the banking sector for over 10 years. When I had my first child in 2008, I resigned from that and chose to be home full time. So the story really from the purposes of this began in 2015. I'm also a qualified financial advisor, and it was something that really started to hit home when we had just had our third child. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to talk about your financial wellness, what it might look like for you, because it is very different for all of us. I'm going to run you through workshop style a little mini financial wellness check, which is just yes/no answers to a number of key questions. And I'm going to talk through how financial wellness and property, how those two kind of fit hand in glove. I'm going to go through some detail on specifically how the property strategy that I use works, and look at the types of properties, the location of where we operate, etc. Going through some of the numbers, some of the fundamentals that you actually need in place before you even step forwards in deciding whether this is actually the right thing for you or not. And then I'm going to, Carol did go with some views. She's from Scotland, and I thought it would be good to have a client who has had experience of that across the border, and how that has compared her Scottish experience versus her English property investment experience. And I will open for contact info and questions. Okay. So the expression "a picture paints 1,000 words." So if you're looking at this kind of picture, what kind of things does it come to you? Do you think financial wellness, or do you immediately think financial desperation? Yeah, for most people I think it would. This was where I lived in 2015, from 2009 to 2015. And it was a house on viewing. I had no intention of buying, but I eventually fell in love with it and found a way to raise the money to buy the home for our kids at that time. It's a home where two of my children were born, and it was a beautiful property that we lived in for some time. However, what the picture doesn't tell is that at that time we had one source of income. I had resigned from my job. We had two 100% mortgages, one on this house and one on a house in Dublin, and we had 3 children. And what it doesn't show is the level of anxiety and worry and stress around money. How many of you here, money is something that causes you stress? It's something you think about. Do I have my retirement provided for? If you have kids, do I have sufficient funds in place to provide for their needs in the future? It's something that I think for the vast majority of people, it really is a source of stress in some shape or other. So picture the scene. We're at the house. 2 of my children have October birthdays, and we're having a birthday party here. We've got lots of family and friends coming. And instead of me focusing on being present for the day and enjoying the birthdays with the children, 2 letters dropped on my doorstep that morning from the bank, advising us that our mortgages had increased by 0.5% on each. So overnight, we had a significant increase in our mortgage repayments. This wasn't linked to an ECB rate increase. It was purely based on the bank trying to recoup some of the losses that they had in previous years. So it was very much out of the blue. And it was at that point And it really, I suppose it was a catalyst that really made me sit up and think, this is scary. We're pushed right now to the brink. We can just about absorb this increase, but there is nothing stopping them doing this again and again. And then what? What do we do? And this is something that many of you personally and many of your friends and family have experienced. And it's a very scary feeling to have somebody else pulling your strings, and you feel that there's very little that you can do about that. But that for me was the wake-up call that something has to change. And so from coming from a place of what looked externally like financial wellness, I knew that I wanted to move towards a place where I had choice. I had that sense of financial wellness. And so my first step was realize something has to change. I need help. I can't do this myself. I was very comfortable with numbers. I was well educated, but yet I did not know how to navigate the storm that was presented in front of us. So I acquired a mentor. I started reading her book. I then went on to study with her. And every night after the children would go to bed, I would sit down and think, okay, what's my next step? How do I start to put my oxygen mask back on and understand how do I get out of this mess? And very slowly but surely, things started to shift. And the very first thing that I did that changed my perspective immediately was I started to look, instead of all the things that were wrong, things I didn't have, things I couldn't do, things that were very difficult, I very slightly flipped my perspective and started to look at, okay, well, what is right? What is going well? What's standing in my corner? What are my strengths? And just by doing that exercise solely, my perspective changed on how things were. So we were still living in the same home, we still had the same level of expenses, we still only had one income, but yet by leaning into seeing all the things that I had in place, I lived in a beautiful home. I had 3 happy, healthy children. We had 1 good income, and we had 2 properties. So all was not lost. It felt a lot better when I started to look more and more into that. So that is something, an action, an exercise, anyone can do. If you're feeling that pinch right now, and you're thinking, you know, the cost of living crisis is everywhere we look, then that's something that really can reframe, you know, where you are. And I'd encourage you to do that. So what was advised to me at the time was to journal things and to write them out. But with 3 small children, sleep deprivation was pretty high, and I struggled. As soon as I got into bed, I was out. So I would try and run through my head, just mentally, okay, well, today, okay, what are the things I'm grateful for? And the more I did that, the more my perspective changed, even though the external factors didn't immediately start to change, but I started to see things differently. And that's something that doesn't cost any money. It's something we can easily do and access very easily and start to build into our routine. It's still something now I do because, you know, even at different stages, whatever stage you're at, the challenges do arise. And looking at it from the perspective of gratitude is a game changer in my experience. So I started to really study this, and very slowly, over a relatively short period of time, we started to put some investments in place. So it started with a very humble €20. That was all the spare cash that I had at that time. But the €20 that I signed every month to go into some investments created a habit that I still have to this day, where money goes out of my account at the very beginning of the month before any of the other bills are paid. And that action reflects my priority to invest in. I don't leave it until the end of the month to see what's left, because what are the chances that, you know, if you do that, there will be nothing left. So you prioritize it in the same way that, you know, for other elements of your wellness in your life, you make sure that you schedule them in. So I put it at the very first of the month before my mortgage, before any other expenses go out. That is my priority expenses. So that is a habit that has been in place since 2015 for me. The amount over time moved from €20 to 50% of our income at one stage, and then we scaled it back. But it was to reflect the importance that we had to create that light at the end of the dark tunnel. We needed to change what we were doing, and that single action, even though it was with a very small amount of money, was pivotal in changing how we approach things going forward. So also in that time, as if by magic, I really am very much black and white, but I think when it comes to money, there's a certain amount of sorcery in it, and that when you show up in a different way and you start to give your money leadership, so you say, you know, you're putting that €20 aside, it is for investment that grows. Your money starts to respond in kind. And somebody shared with me a while back an analogy which I think works really well for money, and that it is an energy, and what you get put in, you get out. And if you had a friendship where somebody treated you badly, you made an appointment to see them, they don't show up, you send them a message, they don't reply, then that's a level of disrespect, and that friendship is likely to fall apart. The same is true of money, in my opinion, and in my experience personally and with my clients. When you give it attention, you show it leadership, you tell it what you want to do, you know where it is that you want to go with it, then it starts to behave accordingly. So how many of you have a sense at this stage as to really what you want in terms of financial wellness? Like, do you know what your end game is? Show of hands, you have a good idea? Some of you, yes, some of you know. And that is quite often, I'm going to do a little exercise with you on that, it's something where most people don't have that in place, and it's something that we can all access. So I'm going to walk you through a little visualization in a minute on that gives you that clarity, because what's the famous quote about, if you don't have that destination in mind, you'll end up somewhere else. You have no idea as to where you're going. So it's really important to give it that direction. So when you show up respectfully to money, when you're tracking your money, you know what's coming in, you know what's going out, you're giving it direction as to where you want it to go because you know what that end destination is. It responds differently. And if by chance, when I started to take our money more seriously and really say, okay, look, this has to change, what we're going to do, an opportunity dropped into our laps to move to the Isle of Man, which is where I live now. And many of you will be aware that it has a significantly lower tax rate than a lot of other places. And immediately by making that move, which was a difficult thing to do with 3 small children and uprooting them from the only family that they knew, but our quality of life with that one single change instantly improved. So we still have 1 income, we still have 3 children, 200% mortgages. But our circumstances, our take-home pay significantly increased once we made that move. And that was something that just dropped into our laps once we started to show a little bit more direction to it. So this is a number of questions. I have this on my website that you can do as well if you want to get the results emailed to you. They're yes/no questions. So the first question, if you want to just, maybe if you want to write them down or just answer them mentally in your head, whichever you prefer. Take a picture of the questions, or they're also on the website if you want to do it. So the first one is the one I alluded to earlier, is do you have a clear vision of what financial wellness looks like for you? So you guys, some of you have answered that yes, and some no. There's a reason it's the very first question in the checklist when I'm assessing somebody's level of financial wellness at the very beginning, is because, like I said, if you have no clarity on what that looks like for you, it is impossible for you to navigate that. It's like picking up a map and you want to go somewhere but you don't know where that is, so you can end up anywhere, pick any road. And some people are reticent about getting clarity on this because they feel like it's going to box them in. And my experience personally and with clients has been that it doesn't do that. You can amend this, it's not set in stone. But what it does initially when you start looking at it is it just gives you that North Star as to where you are directing yourself towards. Because when decisions then land in your lap, you can decide, is it aligned with where I want to be, or is it going to take me off track? And then you can make an informed decision. And I have found decision making in this much easier when I've had that North Star. And it's something that I revisit myself, usually about twice a year, to make sure that, is there something I need to change? Are my plans aligned with what I'm doing? And it's a really good way to check in on a regular basis. Second question for you, are your expenses less than your income currently? So just a yes or no, and you don't need to share it, for you to do privately. Third question, are you and your loved ones sufficiently protected in the event of death or serious illness? So if something unexpected were to happen, are you sufficiently protected? Or would you potentially be leaving financial desperation behind you if something were to happen? do you have a healthy relationship with debt? So do you have any consumer debt? And by consumer debt, I would include credit cards, personal loans. I wouldn't include mortgage debt in that. And by a healthy relationship, I mean, if you have consumer debt, that you have a plan in place and you have a plan to pay that off over whatever period that is achievable for you. And I have one client who the debt was really getting on top of her, and what she did was she had a very simple idea that she took one of those mindful colouring sheets and broke it into sections, and each time she would pay off £100 or whatever off her debt, she would colour in a little section, and that picture was right in front of her desk. So every day it was a visual reminder of the amount that she'd already paid and what she had left to do, and she took great satisfaction and fulfilment in colouring that in. So it wasn't a case of putting her head in the sand and just pretending, I'm not going to open those envelopes because I don't really want to know what the total is, and I'm just going to let it fester. It's a case of, okay, it is what it is, I've got a plan in place, I'm dealing with it, and we move on. So that's what I feel is a good, healthy relationship with debt. That is something that a lot of us have. When we manage it in an informed way, then it can be something that doesn't cause us an issue, but it is a massive problem for a huge section of society in terms of credit cards largely. And the last one is, have you sufficiently provided for retirement needs? And for most people, the answer to that question is no, or it is partly, but I'm not quite sure if I had enough. And you can have that conversation with the financial advisor, and depending on what the financial advisor's approach is, you can have a very different answers. My personal approach to it is quite simple. And I had this conversation as recently as last Wednesday with somebody who had 2 public service pensions in place, but had no idea whether that was enough. She was single, she didn't have independence, so it was a little bit easier for calculation. Very simply, it is possible to figure out that when you get to retirement age, whatever that age looks like for you, what do you expect your current level of expenses to be? And the way I like to approach that is, I look at what I currently have and I go through them and think, well, I have this at retirement, yes, no, and I work through them, and it will give me a good idea as to what I expect I'll need in place when I get to retirement, and if there are other things that I need to add in. So let's say at retirement I expect my expenses are going to be in the region of £4,000, and I've got a pension provision at the moment which will give me £2,000. Okay, I've got a clear gap of £2,000 a month. And this was a conversation I had with myself at the very beginning when I looked at this initially. Was I had a gap, and my question then was, okay, well, I've got a gap, great, that's a good realisation to have. Now, how do I address that gap? And for me, it was property that I chose to address that. And you can address that in many different ways. But for me, that was the tool that I used to bridge that gap for me. And I figured out then, very simply, kind of back of a piece of paper, calculation as to knowing how much one property brought me in, how many properties did I need to fill that gap. And so that was the very simple approach that I took. So just based on the checklist, questions that I've just gone through, any comments, any questions? Any of you so far? No? Or Claire?
Can I ask on point 3, I do personal payments, but should it come through your business?
It depends on your circumstances. So a lot of this is, it depends answer. So do you have a financial advisor?
Yeah.
An accountant? And have you asked that question?
Not recently, no.
Okay. It's definitely so. In a lot of situations, it is advisable to take it from your company, but not all. So it would depend on your individual circumstances, but I would definitely encourage you to have that conversation. So I make it as an action, stick in your diary whenever, because if it is beneficial for you to start that through your company sooner rather than later. So yeah, I would put that in your diary to ask that question. Often it is. So it's worth, and it's usually very worthwhile to do that up front. And I think we have, there's one of the ladies, I think she's gone out now, she's on one of the expert pods, who may be able to answer more generally. Are you based in Scotland?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. She is based in Scotland also, so it's worth Shia, I think is her name. You're going to be the first one.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Yeah, it's just doing it. So, like for myself, it's easy, and like personally, like, I run a social enterprise,
okay,
which we're turning into a scheme, so there'll be different our company structures. So, I suppose thinking about that, because there's an asset lot, there's so many other things that come into the business. It's just interesting to think how you could actually answer those questions. It's a different type of business model, you know, it's not about, even though it's profit generating, it's more than profit. You know, there's no dividends or shares, people aren't getting paid, you know, it's a good thing.
yes,
And all that can happen really is my salary increases
okay,
through it. And when we turn into a skill, that will change again, because then it's Oscar regulated, so it has to be, you know, why should that increase? Why can we put in these places? So yeah, it's just interesting to, like, I've kind of done two columns.
yeah, exactly, that's a good
Yeah.
way to do it, and that's a good point to raise, is that when you're asking these questions, I guess from my experience and where I've come from, I've answered them in a personal perspective, but also for those of you obviously who are thinking from with your business hat on as to, you know, you probably, it's well worthwhile doing those two constructs, so that's a good point to raise, thank you. Any other questions, comments? So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes now and do this where you feel most comfortable. So I'm going to address the first question around vision, because quite a few of you actually, you don't have something in place. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable. If you're not, that's fine. Leave them open. I'm just going to talk you through just a little visualization from your ideal day and what that financial wellness might look like. Okay? So if you want to, for those who want to close your eyes, go ahead and I'm going to take a few deep breaths first, because we've had a busy morning, there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of stuff going on. We'll just center ourselves for a minute. Take one deep breath in, hold that for 3, and exhale. And take another deep breath in, and down as far as your tummy. Hold it for 3, and exhale. And take one more deep breath in. Hold that for 3, and exhale. I'd love you to imagine that it's early in the morning and you're just waking up, wherever that is. And notice where it is you're waking up. And you're about to begin what looks like your ideal day. So notice where you are. Are you by yourself? Is there somebody else with you? Other people? And start to see yourself walking through that day. What are the kind of things that you're spending your day doing? Does it involve any work? Or have you got a team in place and that's all being outsourced? Or do you put in maybe a couple of hours in the morning, getting those crucial director, CEO tasks out of the way before moving on to the rest of the day? So see where that's playing out. What are you wearing? What are the kind of feelings that are coming up from you? Do you feel peaceful, calm, happy, excited? What are the emotions that are coming up? And you picture yourself in this day, doing exactly as you please. You are driving the bus on this. You're deciding exactly how you're spending your time. And you get an amazing sense of fulfillment out of what it is that you're doing. And as you proceed through the rest of the day, maybe you stop for lunch. What does that look like? Is it in your home? Do you meet with friends? Do you maybe go out to one of your favorite restaurants? What's the weather like? Are there particular smells that you smell? Are there sounds that you identify happening in the background? what's going on as you walk yourself through that afternoon. And the afternoon stretches ahead of you. You think, at your leisure, what are you going to do? How will you spend your afternoon? Is there a little bit more work required, or have you done what you needed to do in the morning and the afternoon is totally yours? And you can spend it perhaps doing some of the things that really light you up. What are the kind of activities? Who are the people that you spend this afternoon with? How does it feel to be doing the things that you really enjoy? What are the emotions that are coming up when you picture yourself in that scene? Entirely designed by you. And entirely possible, because you have set things up exactly how you would like. You've got exactly the support you need in place. And it's really fulfilling and empowering to see that the work that you've put in over the last few years has gotten you where you envisioned yourself to be all that time ago. And as the day comes to a close, you're winding down and you're reflecting back on your day. And your entire body, being, is filled with gratitude for the most amazing experience that you've had. And you just want to have that day over and over again. It really feels that you are embodying financial wellness and what it looks like for you. Knowing that it is possible and that every step that you're taking each day is bringing you closer to that vision becoming a reality. So it's probably worth now, if you'd like to open your eyes, just to take a few minutes just to jot down some of the things that came up in that vision. What are the things that featured? Because what you might find is that maybe you were surprised by some of the things that popped up in it, or maybe weren't. And it might have raised a question about maybe getting more support. It might have raised the possibility of scheduling more time in your diary for downtime. So maybe it's blocking out an hour where you spend it doing something that really lights you up. Because it's been my experience and with clients that the smarter you work doesn't necessarily mean it has to be hard. And the more downtime that I have in my diary, the more creative I am, the more productive I am, because in the time that I'm in the office, I get significantly more done because my batteries are well and truly topped up. And for me personally, financial wellness is not necessarily about a number. It's about a feeling. It's about a choice. It's about being able to have that day any day I choose. And it's about putting the pieces in place that allows you to have that experience on a regular basis. And some people will push back and say, well, that's all very well and good, and it seems a little bit lofty as to, is that really a reality? And I would absolutely say 100%, it is entirely your doing. So when I found myself in that house that looked like it should be financial wellness, but the experience was anything but, it was getting the clarity in that vision and taking those baby steps day after day that got me to that place where those days now are my regular event for me, and I can switch that on or off any time I choose. It took work, and it took application, and it took clarity on what I wanted, and then backtracking as to, well, if this is where I want to be, what are the steps I need to put in place to get myself to that place? So there's no rocket science to this. Nothing I share is anything very complicated. It's very simple. And I think one of the things that as women is an absolute superpower for us is our intuition. And we have, you can get chills or truth bombs thinking about it, we so often override our intuition when it comes to all sorts, and definitely when it comes to money. And if you listen to your intuition as to what that guidance is, as to maybe you should take that meeting with so-and-so, or you know what, maybe that actually isn't the best use of your time. Trust your intuition on it, because the science is now catching up to show that that intuition, that we have more neural pathways in our tummies than we actually have in our heads, apparently. So if there is a scientific basis to it. So I would encourage you, you know, whatever your intuition is, if something came to you during that vision that you think, you know, your logical mind tried to dismiss it, don't dismiss it. Anything that came to you in that, capture that down and pay attention to what came up, and you'll find slowly but surely those pieces kind of come to pass and actually start to become a reality. Okay? So I hope that was useful to some of you who didn't have clarity and vision. So we're going to dive into a little bit on property, and we'll circle back to the financial wellness piece at the end. Before I get into that, is there any questions on the vision piece that we did, or any comments? Okay. So in terms of the property, like I said to you, when I did that calculation of here's what I have in place for my retirement, here's what I would like, okay, I got a gap. Property was something that I wanted to use because it was something that the expression safe as houses, generally, everybody needs a place to live. It's a very simple asset class that most people understand. And I wanted to do it in a very simple way that I could understand, and it would really bridge that gap that I had. So I figured out that I needed about 8 houses to bridge the gap that I had at the time, and so I set about doing quite a bit of research across the UK and Ireland, because I had 2 properties at this stage in Ireland, and they were doing fine, but they were both accidents because we lived in each home first, and then we were unable to sell it, so we just turned it into a rental property. One of them we've since sold. We still have one in Ireland, but it was an accidental property investment strategy as opposed to something well thought out and planned. So this time I thought, okay, I've got experience. I got experience in doing it accidentally, haphazardly, falling into it, and not being in control of how it's actually going to work out. So this time I wanted to do a very different approach. So I did a lot of research across a number of cities across UK and Ireland, and we started to look at the Northeast in particular, because the Northeast was somewhere I had lived for a couple of years, and I was familiar with the culture, I was familiar with the property there, and I felt that with the property prices there, I could afford to cut my teeth in somewhere that had a lower entry price point. So the houses in particular, we eventually found a partner in the Northeast who was able to find the properties for us, was able to do the refurbishment, find the tenants and manage the tenancies. So from start to finish on that process, they looked after everything. During the COVID period, we bought 6 units. We bought them remotely. I never left the island due to the restrictions. I wasn't able to travel, so everything was done over Zoom and remotely, and it was all possible. A lot of people had said to me at the time, like, are you absolutely out of your mind to buy property with somebody you've never met? And my pushback was, well, I am not giving this individual any money. He is facilitating the process. I pay him a fee to do that, but the large chunks of money for the purchase go through an SRA registered solicitor. So I had risk tested, assessed it, and was happy with it. But looking from the outside in, lots of people thought we were insane doing it. And I set this up to do with my long-term friend from uni, so somebody I really trusted. So we started working, we found our first one, beyond excited, and we pushed really hard to get it over the line in December 2020, and to close out a year which had been, very challenging for most people. It was particularly challenging in our household because my husband at the time was an airline pilot, and obviously the travel industry was wiped out to a large degree. So overnight his income was gone. We had one income and then zip, gone. He had no furlough, and the government and the Isle of Man were paying £200 a week. We had a family of 5. Thankfully, because of all the work we had put in previously in terms of financial wellness, putting all the different pots in place, we didn't worry about paying the mortgage, feeding the children, paying the bills. That was all taken care of. But I was very concerned as to if that income would come back, when it would come back, how are we going to survive in the longer term. And in the midst of that, just to shake it up, I realised that I was in a relationship that I really wasn't happy in. and I thought, I'm 100% financially dependent here. How am I going to figure out whether this is something I want to stay in or not? And property was something that gave me that lifeline to decide, to give me the financial independence to decide, is this something that I want to continue with or not? So we pushed really hard to get that first one over the line in December 2020. And once we had that proof of concept, then we repeated it very quickly with 5 other ones within that 12-month period. So we had proof of concept, it worked really well. We were looking at 2 to 3 bedroom terraced houses in the northeast. Anybody who knows the northeast, we work in a geographic area of South Shields, which is on the coast, Sunderland, which is just below it, and then Durham inland. So if you draw a triangle between those 3 areas, the properties are all located in that space. The company found it for us. They literally looked after the refurbishment. Get an odd phone call if they had a question, but generally I didn't hear. We totally gave them control to deal with it. We would get updates as we went. The properties that we particularly target, they targeted local authority tenants, specifically families, so they need access to bus routes, schools, local amenities. So it's quite specific as to what they actually, who they actually target and where they look for the properties in. Typical purchase costs, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, so anybody who's interested, we can have a conversation side, but this just gives you a feel for it. Properties largely are in the region of 60 to 70,000, so not massive money in terms of looking for your first property. It makes it accessible to a lot more people. Legal fees typically are about 1,000, stamp duty about 2,000 on a 60 grand house, and sourcing fee is 4,000. So that's a fee that we pay the company we work with to do all the legwork and the heavy lifting. If you're buying a mortgage, you may have a broker fee involved, and the refurbishment amount is an amount that's confirmed when you allocate the property, because as you can imagine, that varies largely based on what property you've actually been allocated. So I'm just going to pause there just to check on the numbers piece. Any questions on that side of things, or anything that isn't quite clear?
Was there a reason why you went for the lower prices of the houses?
There was, and
Yeah.
brilliant question, thank
Okay.
you. When I was doing the research at the very beginning, I listed out all the different places. So I think in the UK, I looked in the northeast, I looked in Liverpool, Manchester, I think Birmingham, and then a few places in Ireland, and I put them all across in a spreadsheet. I looked at the purchase price in each of those locations. I looked at the rental income, I looked at what the payments would be, and I worked out all the figures on it. And when we came out at the bottom, Dublin, where we already had a house, looked like the yield, the return on it was far higher than the northeast or anywhere else. So I thought, well, why don't we go to Dublin? Why does everybody keep telling us to go to the northeast? It didn't make sense. However, when we then took a theoretical 100k and said, okay, if we've got 100k, how can we spend this? When I looked at Dublin, I could buy one with a deposit and using a mortgage. When I went to the northeast, I could buy 4 with that. So then we're thinking, okay, now I understand that return, even though it's lower than Dublin, is multiplied by 4. And not only that, is instead of me buying 1 in Dublin, where I've got all my eggs in one basket, I then have 4 in the northeast. So if rent falls over on one of them or a tenant leaves, then I've still got 3. So my risk is much better spread. Yeah. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Sorry. Do you know when you find a tenant, do you fix them into a 1-year contract, or do you do?
They're in a standard AST, so yes, it is, and then that's reviewed. They keep very tight, especially when it's a new tenant, they keep very tight monitoring on them at the beginning to make sure that they do significant checks in the beginning to make sure they're ticking all the boxes, references, etc., credit checks, but they will also do visits on a regular basis to make sure, and if a trade has to go in to do any repair, the trades adverse to keep an eye that they're not drying clothes or doors on radiators. If there's any mold, if there's any issues, they're trained to pick up any issue and feed it back. So we keep a tight hold. So once we get into the 1-year mark, then we know whether they're a good egg or not, and we can move forward. Then we've got a better sense of security. So that's the way it works at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, I had a coughing fit, so I had to leave.
No worries.
So I might have missed this bit. But I'm assuming you're doing this through a business, because Because you're only paying 2% on each property. So that's how you sort that out
Yes.
from the beginning. Right,
Yes.
okay. That
So
makes
it's bought,
sense.
and no, I didn't cover it, thank you for raising it. It is bought through a limited company.
Yeah.
And the reason why, and I would say 90% of the clients we work with use a company to buy the properties through. And the main reason for that is because if you're buying it in your personal name now, the mortgage interest relief is no longer available. So that means that it impacts your return, so you're getting less from it. So if you're buying it through a limited company, you can still get the mortgage interest relief, so that is a help, and it's worth doing. But what I would say is there's a handful of clients that for their own personal reasons prefer to buy it in their own name, but the vast majority are buying it through limited companies.
Hi. What if you've bought 4 different properties, which is amazing, but let's say we've targeted an area that isn't the best right now, but is definitely up and coming, and we're thinking, right, let's buy to let there. Would you recommend, in terms of doing what you're doing in terms of buying 4 different properties, or would you go and take the leap, like you said about jumping to Dublin? Obviously, Dublin's you never know if it's going up or down, but Dundee, for example, you've got the Eden project, you've got, things that the property prices are going to go up over the next few years. Would you recommend taking a risk in buying in an area like that, or do you think it would be best to focus on the North East? Because I've heard about the North East being good prices for housing.
It's going to be one of those really annoying it depends answers, I'm afraid. We have a property in Dublin, as I mentioned, because it was accidentally acquired. It was our family home initially. So would I buy in Dublin now? No, because it's way too expensive, and from a rental perspective, the regulation and the taxation there is insane. So I wouldn't go near there personally right now. Dundee versus the North East. I don't subscribe to the train of thought that about predicting what's going to happen. The way I like to approach it is the fact that we work with somebody who knows the area inside out. Housing is a basic human need, and because of the tenants that we work with, the local authority tenants, they need those houses, and because of the culture in the area, they constantly need that, and there will always be that. It's been there for as long as there's been tracking in place. So I went with what I knew because I understood it. And I had an expert, feet on the ground, who knew if I give him a street name, he will say yes or no. So I had a broad idea as to how the perspective works, but my answer would always be, I would never try time the market, because I've got clients at the moment, the media would have us thinking, and I'll do talk about this a little bit later, that, we probably shouldn't step outside our front doors, there's so many scary things happening. But in terms of interest rate environments, we bought our last 2, so we're up to 8 now this year. And, again, we've got people saying to us, like, why would you buy houses, this? And it's a really simple answer from my perspective is around the numbers. They gave me the purchase price, I saw what the cash flow was on it, and then I looked at, okay, if I leave my cash that I'm going to use potentially for this in the bank, what's going to happen to it? Well, first of all, is it secure? Maybe, maybe not. If you think it is secure, then what's the rate of return that you're getting? And then I looked at what, if I put it into a house, it's in a fixed asset, I own it, and it's cash flowing me, even at those high interest rates. I think we were paying 5.9, it's higher now. It was giving me £350 cash flow per unit per month. Now, nowhere else I looked could I get that kind of cash flow. So for me, it was a really simple decision. So I stuck with what I knew, and I think there are lots of very opinionated perspectives on, where's the right place, where's the wrong place. I don't think there is a right or wrong. I think it's where it comes back to your own individual perspective. Do you want to do it yourself? Well, then what market are you most familiar with? If you want somebody else to do it with, well, get an expert who is expert at their, in the area that they're in, has a proven track record, has a wide client base who you can talk to and get their feedback from. So I would say I don't know anything about Dundee to make an informed comment on it, but I think run the numbers, talk to people who are doing it in the areas that you're considering, and decide yourself what feels, it goes back to that woman's intuition, like what feels like a good thing to me. Would I prefer to have it close or farther away with an expert? So.
Amazing, thank you. I think it was just that kind of, do we go buy 5 or do we buy 1 in a good spot that's up and coming? That's kind of the...
Well, and with that, even if you were thinking of going to in an area that you could potentially buy 5, If you're really unsure, my advice would always be just try one, see how one goes. Cut your teeth on it, especially when you're looking at 60,000. If you're talking about buying on a mortgage, you're talking about investing maybe 25 to 30,000. So it's a significant amount of money, absolutely, but you're not throwing a massive chunk on it, so you can manage the risk then. And if you go through the process, it feels good, you're happy with how it's all working, how it's cash flowing, it's doing exactly what it was supposed to do, then you have the confidence to go again and to see, okay, well, let's try a second, and then you can do it. But equally, I have clients who come and buy them in blocks of 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever. They're usually cash-rich businesses that their accountant told them you need to find a home for this cash, or you need to top up a pension or whatever. They will go do that. So both are possible. You don't have to buy X amount in a certain time. It's entirely your design, what pace you go at.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions on that, please? No? Cool. So that's the numbers piece. In terms of income and expenditure, so that's the purchase costs. So we've got rental income of about 9,000. So each unit gives you about £750 a month. You have your standard letting fee, and then generally we advise you to put 10% away in your own account for those things that might pop up in terms of repairs or if there are any voids. And that's giving at the moment, based on those figures, a gross yield of about 14% and net of 11%. Now everybody calculates these figures differently, so I've explained with the last week's insight how we do it. So the gross is calculated by your annual income of £9,000 divided by the purchase price, and net is where we take off the letting fees and figure out what that then looks like in terms of a yield. This doesn't include the mortgage payment, and like I said on my example when I purchased our latest two, I would always encourage you, if you're looking to do that, is to run the numbers as to whatever it is you're looking to do, to work it out. Okay, well, the scenario A looks like this, and run it all the way through to what it's going to give you bottom line every month. So if there's a mortgage involved in that, make sure you take that into consideration, and that will give you a good idea, so you'll be able to make an informed decision. So I mentioned this slide, in answering the question. There's a lot of fear around interest rates, and really, is it good time, is it not good time? To me, it's a very case-by-case basis. If you're buying a good property in a good location and your objective is to hold it for the long term, the interest rates are less an issue, because we've now got 8. We are, as I'll share in a minute, that I'm using it in the short term to add an additional stream of income for myself. I'm using it in the longer term to bridge my pension gap. And after my lifetime, I will pass it to my kids. So I'm not fussed about time in the market. I'm holding this house for the foreseeable future. And whether it goes up or down, it's irrelevant, because as long as it's giving me that cash flow every month, it really is just a number on the page. When it becomes a pertinent point is when I want to maybe take some cash out of that. So it's grown. We have our first 6. There's probably about there's probably about 80,000 worth of equity in the first 6 that we have in the space of time that we have. So when they come off their fixed rates, we'll be able to take that money out and go again. But that's the only issue I see in terms of capital. So this strategy is primarily a cash flow strategy. So if you want cash in the bank every month, this is what we do. So whether the price of the property is going up or down, it's a number on the page. It doesn't have a huge impact on our decisions. So that's why I don't get too caught up in that. And as in terms of the interest rates, if I talk to my mortgage broker and I say I'm looking to buy this house, she will tell me what the rate is, she will tell me what the repayment is, and I will work out if the rent is $750, my payment is this, my letting fees are that, what am I going to come out at the end? And I will do a simple calculation like that, and that's my yes or no. Does it work or does it not? And that's essentially how I make the decision. But it's really, property isn't for everybody. You do need to have a certain level of comfort with it to decide, whether it's really something that, you want to do and whether it's the best option for you. So it always comes back to the individual. It depends on what else you have, because when I'm looking at financial wellness, I'm not just looking at property. I have investments across the other asset classes as well. So you're trying to make sure that you've got that balance. Okay. So like we did in terms of the financial wellness with that kind of North Star, before you get into property, I would encourage you to have some of the fundamentals in place as well, to ask yourself those questions of why do I want to get into property? Is it something, maybe that popped up in that vision, you like to have multiple properties. And the strategy that I do is by plan, so it's very steady, eddy, vanilla. There's nothing very clever or exciting about it, but it provides a really good steady income. There's lots of other strategies like houses of multiple occupancy, self-catering, Airbnb as well, which provides me with extra diversification. So you really want to get clarity, and hopefully the vision gave you that, and the clarity around what if you want to do properly, what do you want in place. So in the beginning, I set my goal. I wanted to be able to get £2,000 a month out of this, because that was the number that I needed to make that decision in terms of the financial dependence I had, to give you that independence to make a decision on my relationship. And your next steps then, if you're looking at doing this, so the question is, do you buy it for a mortgage, or do you buy it on cash? Do you buy it in personal name, or do you buy it in company? We've talked about that in terms of the mortgage interest relief, and it's worth a conversation with a mortgage broker if you have one in your network already. So I've talked about this piece, the purposes, the main green pieces it gives me. It bridges my pension gap, adds an income stream, and provides a legacy for my kids. So I'm going to ask Carol to come up now. She's going to share her experience of it. So I've known her for the last couple of years. She is somebody I've introduced to this strategy, and it works really well for her. So she's just going to give you chat a little bit as to how it works for her from the Scottish perspective, because she is an investor in Scotland also, and then she subsequently come to this in the last few years. So she has the two to compare, which I can't, I don't. So it was valuable to maybe bring the local.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I've been in property for nearly 20 years, investing in property, and I probably fell into it at the very, very beginning, and I played about with it, but over the years I realised, I loved the cash flow, and I loved how your property would gain in value. But then, I do love property, I could talk about it all day, but what property has done for me is actually, my husband and I both lost our jobs, and because of the 3 properties I had a way back, almost 20 years ago, I could see the value in having properties. So in 2015, I lost my job, my husband lost his job, he was the main breadwinner, and I really panicked. And I thought, right, Scott, let's go all into property. So that's what I did, buying in Scotland, and it took up a lot of time, but eventually we became financially free with property. We replaced my husband's income and mine, and that was all good. And then 2 years ago I met Caitriona, and it was through a mutual friend. She put us together on Zoom, and she introduced me to what she was doing with the North East. Now, I always bought in Scotland, and I always said I would never buy in England, but anyway, it's all changed. And she told me about the strategy that she was doing, and I thought, right, okay, so I pay someone to look for properties for me, they do a refurb on it, they find the tenant, and then they look after it for me. I thought that is win-win, because time, that's what I didn't have before. I wanted time. So that was tick number 1. 2, it's now my husband's fully retired. I feel like I'm retired, but I like to have, I do Airbnb as well. But that was that. But now, over the last couple of years with Scotland and what they're doing with property and this additional 6% tax, it really has put me off buying in Scotland. It's really put me off, like the way the laws have changed, how you cannot, I think the way Scotland are doing it is everything's for the tenant and not for the landlord, and it should be equal, 50-50, but it's not. So that's why I love investing in the north and east of England. The properties are affordable, the cash flow is amazing, but the additional tax, you're not paying 6%, you're paying 3%. That is huge for me, and it's totally hands off. And I'm so grateful actually to have been introduced to Caitriona. I didn't know her 2 years ago, and we've become really good friends, and we worked together, and it's been a really, really good journey. That's all I can say. And in that time, have just completed my 6th buy-to-let, and I've also got another project that I'm working with this company as well. So that's just my business. Thank you.
Can I ask, is it a limited company that you've got
got yours under as well, all your properties?
The ones in Scotland are all in my sole name.
Right.
And when I started working with the North East, I've got a limited company, and I just wish that all my properties were under the limited company.
And how challenge, because I've already got two properties, can you transfer them in here? So can you transfer
Yeah,
them
you
over
can.
into, like if I was going to start one?
I suppose you'd need to
It's
see.
costly.
It's costly.
It's gonna cost quite a lot of tax.
Yeah, right. I'm just looking at it.
I will be looking into maybe, if it's cost effective. I will change it.
It's certainly worth looking into to
It's
see.
probably just, it would be just me, the properties are in the dual name that I've got at the moment, in my name and yours, so if I was going to start out, better off in a limited company.
Yeah, if you're going to start, it's definitely like everything. I would do a scenario for leaving it as is and putting in a new company. But whether it's with your existing or new, and just talk it out, because I spoke to a couple recently, actually, a Scottish couple, and they hadn't been told, they were told to, just go ahead and buy it in your name and you can fix it later in the company. And I was like, well, you can, but that really wouldn't be very clever if your ultimate plan is to have it in a company, because it's going to be very costly, never mind the hassle factor. So that was, it's always best to spend your time up front assessing what the options are and figuring out based on your individual circumstances. So talk to your accountant, talk to your tax specialist and get your specific advice, because no two people will be the same in terms of what your circumstances are, and it is always better when you're starting something like this to make sure that you get your ducks in a row first, rather than go hell for leather into and think that's fine, I'll fix it later. That can be very costly to do, and I wouldn't recommend doing that. So.
There's also one thing you can do, I've done for one of my clients, that dual ownership. So there is, it's quite tricky, but you can have a partnership and then get that into companies. So some of the tax breaks come as you move through that cycle, partnership and company, rather than owning personally directly into company, because it triggers lots of tax events. It's like a sale in the market, owning it personally and then moving it to a company, that's why it's expensive. And some people might do it if you've got 6+ properties, because you get tax breaks. But if it's 2, you've got to really number companies. But partnerships
Have
are
to
a bad
check
idea.
with, obviously, who are the owner, whether or not.
It's worth a conversation.
Yeah.
So I'll have, it's definitely look into both options so that you're very clear with everything.
Not any mortgages or anything on the
Yeah.
properties or anything like that, but obviously the limited company, if you're looking for to do with model.
Yeah. Well, definitely look at your options. Look at both sides of it. So you're going into it as open So I'm going to wrap up now. I'm conscious of time. So my financial wellness reality now. So I've gone through that, and we started in a place which looked like a good place. It wasn't. Done all the steps in between. Got the good habits in place. Paying a lot of attention to what's coming in, what's going out. Used property as a tool to bridge that gap for me. But always guided by that North Star of what financial wellness looks like for me. And for me now, this is what financial wellness looks like. This is where I live, in the Isle of Man, and this is something that lots of people come to visit, but this is where I live, and it makes me smile every time I drive back in. If I'm flying back to the island, I have a rugged farm in the middle of nowhere in the Irish countryside, and I always had this desperate desire to be by the sea, because that was part of my financial wellness. And to then have that move to the island where we live, the sea's just everywhere, I can see it out my window, it's at the end of the street, it just makes me smile. So that's not necessarily about my zeros in the bank account, it's about what I experience on a daily basis. And that was one decision that took me to that and filled in a massive part of what that looked like for me. It also, for me, is being able to educate my children up until recently. So having that quality time, not having to work to a large degree because property was bringing income into me. It's about when I had health scares last year, being able to take my foot off the gas and not have to push working and throw whatever resources I needed to getting myself back to a better health place. For me, it's about choice. It's not necessarily about, for most people, for the private yachts and jets and luxury cars. It's about basics. And when you've got maybe kids in your life, it's about giving them opportunities. It's about a lot of simple things. It's about security, knowing that if anything happens, you're protected. It's about just our normal day-to-day lives, but taking that stress and anxiety out and just knowing you drop your shoulders, you've got an emergency fund in place, your retirement is provided for, you've got diversification of income, and it's going to be okay. And that doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen very slowly and surely when you put those pieces in place, okay? So to connect with me on LinkedIn, if you want to connect with me there, you can do that financial wellness check online, because it gives you a commentary, and the web address is financialwellnessacademy.co.uk, or you can drop me an email. If you want to specifically have a conversation around property, email me or drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I can send you the case study brochure, which is a PDF document which gives you the numbers in a PDF form, and it shows you some of the case studies as well, as to what it looks like, and then we can take the conversation from there if you want to have a one-on-one discussion, and that's really the scope. There's no charge for that. So I think we've gone through questions, but is there anything else anybody wants to ask before we wrap up? Well, and I'm around for most of the rest of the day, so if you want to have a chat, please do feel free to give me a shout. So, as I said, to close, just remember, property is a tool. There's lots of tools that you can use. For me, it's one that gave me the opportunity to exit a marriage that I wasn't happy in. I was fully financially dependent until I got those properties in place, and that gave me the realisation to have that independence and to be able to leave. And too many women I see are stuck in jobs or relationships or situations that they're just genuinely not happy, and money often traps them. So this is a gift you give yourself, to be able to give that choice and make that informed decision to stay, to go, whatever the situation is. It allows you to take time off to care for yourself or loved ones guilt-free, because you don't have to worry about, I need to generate money, You've got an emergency fund in place. If you've got an emergency, turn that on and get yourself wherever you need to be, whether it's with a parent or a child or whoever. And you get to live your life 100% as you desire. This isn't a lofty dream, it's my reality that I live, it's the reality that my clients live, and there's no rocket science about it. It's having that desire, that motivation to do that, and to really then put them in place, because you are designing your financial wellness. So be very clear in the destination. That's why I took some time to actually identify what that is for you. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for all the questions. If you want to grab me at any stage, I'm here till later in the day.